All right, good morning. Everybody ready for the weekend? I have 3 football drafts this weekend, so I'm very excited for the weekend. I'm like, it's coming. Right. Well, no, 2 this weekend, 2 on Monday. You ready? Well, I haven't done my research, but I will be ready. And it's been a long week, so weekend is coming. But we get to start chapter 2 today. We're going to build on what we've talked about in chapter 1. So chapter 1, we talked a lot about how the time and place, kind of how we viewed abnormality in the past and how we define abnormality. Now we're going to look at the models of abnormality, right? So in this chapter, and then chapter 3, we're still kind of setting the stage. But in this chapter, we'll look at the different ways that we can view a disorder and what has maybe caused the disorder, how we're going to then treat it. And as a side note, a lot of these kind of counter each other, right? So we'll talk about like a biological model, and we'll talk about a Freudian model, and they're complete polar opposites. And so a lot of the thought now is that we can kind of combine these together. But I think it's important to understand each one individually before we say that we can look at them all together and how they can contribute to mental illness and what could cause a mental illness and how we could then treat it. So that's what we'll focus on for today and then into Tuesday, looking at these different models of abnormality. And what I'll do with each one of them as we go through is I'll write a couple of like key terms for each one up on the board to help you keep them straight. But if you've taken any other psychology courses, you've probably talked about these models. They come up in every single like lower division psych class as we talk about different ways of viewing phenomenon, in our case, abnormal psych. But with these models, we're looking at a set of assumptions or concepts that are going to help us explain and interpret different observations that we're making. In this case, about mental illness. And another word for a model would be a lens, a paradigm, a theory. All of those are kind of getting at the same idea that they're going to spell out some basic assumptions. They're going to help us decide what might cause a disorder and then how we might be able to treat it. And again, there isn't necessarily a best model. It's kind of all of them together. It's almost always the case in psychology that if you say something like, it's a combination of all the factors that led to X, you're probably going to be right? And so it's a combination of all these models, but we'll look at them individually before we get to that. So again, what we'll do is we'll go through each one and you'll see these models again. When we get to the disorders, every single disorder is going to have a model that maybe explains it best, or a couple of models. And so you'll see them all semester, but let's introduce them now. So the first one, really big common model, the biological or medical model. From this perspective, we're seeing that mental illnesses have physical causes. I have a list of the common physical causes up here, but from a medical perspective, think of like your medical doctor, or a biological perspective, we're looking at the role of things like anatomy, brain chemistry, brain circuits, genetics, viral infections. All of them are physical elements that we think are causing someone to have a mental illness. And so if we believe that physical elements are the culprit, like say a neurotransmitter imbalance, then we're going to give somebody something like a medication to correct it. So these models not only explain, but they also drive the treatment. So one thought here is that maybe there's something anatomically going on in the brain. Not the most common, but maybe somebody has some kind of damage to the brain in some region. And it might be possible to fix that in some cases, which is one possible treatment here, considering surgery. But the second bullet is by far more common. Brain chemistry, right? Looking at the role of things like neurotransmitters. And how many of you, out of curiosity, took intro psych, just by show of hands? It's like strongly recommended prep, like the vast majority of you. So hopefully neurotransmitters sound familiar. I'm going to draw you what's going to be the most beautiful neuron you've ever seen. I couldn't even say it without laughing. I'm going to try and draw you a neuron, right? You can laugh, but it's all right. Okay, so here are my dendrites. Let's stop there. It's not awful. I'm going to keep going. All right, here's our little nucleus, long axon. And then at the other end, we have the terminal branches. Works, right? And terminal buttons. My kids know better than to ask me to draw things for them. They're always like, I'll ask mom. Like a good idea. All right. Okay, terminal buttons, dendrites, nucleus, right, long axon. We communicate through electrochemical impulses, right? Whenever our neurons are communicating with each other, which is constantly, they're constantly firing and communicating. We have these tiny little electrically charged particles that are inside and outside of a neuron called ions. And they can be positive or negative in nature. And whenever we need to send a message, we have this process where these little semi-permeable gates open up on the neuron. We're going to do this through a high-tech process here. The little gates open up, the positive ions flow in, the negative ones flow out, right? And we get what's called an action potential occurring. Okay? So there's an electrical change in this neuron. It fires, creates an action potential. The message goes all the way down to the end, and it reaches these little terminal buttons. Terminal just means end, right? End buttons. And then there would be a gap right here called the synapse. And then there'd be another neuron right next to it. And it's beautiful. It's a shame you can't see this absolutely perfect neuron I drew behind the sheet here, I wish. Right, but there'd be another neuron right next to it. Right? So out of these terminal buttons, neurotransmitters are going to be released. So these little dots will be neurotransmitters. And they keep the message going to the next neuron. Okay, just as a kind of a quick review. Yeah.
You said I don't take
So a message, like neurons exist in long chains, right? They're not connected to each other. They have a little gap. But think about it like almost like a strand of dominoes. There's like a little space in between each one, but if you tip one over, it affects the one next to it, right? So if there was another neuron here, what's going to happen is its little neurotransmitters float across. They're picked up right here by the dendrites. Then they would travel down, and then we release again, and it's picked up by the next one and the next one. And it happens so fast, right? But it's this long chain of an action that happens. And so these little neurotransmitters are in charge of keeping that message going. Now we have a ton of neurotransmitters in our system, and when they're functioning properly, we don't really notice them. But if they're out of balance, they can cause a lot of problems for us, right? And different medications or drugs, both legal or illegal, prescribed or purchased, right? They can affect neurotransmitters quite a bit, right? So for example, with schizophrenia, people have way too much dopamine. And dopamine is a huge culprit when it comes to neurotransmitters. Can anyone think of another neurotransmitter? I gave you dopamine. Anyone know of another one? Yeah.
Serotonin.
Serotonin. Right, probably right. Serotonin, that's the other really big one. Dopamine, serotonin. Do you have another one?
I know there's another big one, but for some reason my brain ain't working.
Totally, but it's early. What was that? So great. So oxytocin is actually a hormone.
It's like something I'm thinking of.
Yeah, it's a really big one, but it's a hormone. So hormones go through the bloodstream. Another hormone, right? You're on the right track. Anyone want to help her out? Anyone know of another neurotransmitter? We have dopamine and serotonin. There's another big one that starts with a G. Yeah. GABA, right? Also glutamate, acetylcholine, norepinephrine. There's a ton of them. And you named some really big ones, but they're hormones. So neurotransmitters operate through the nervous system. They're very fast. Hormones operate through the endocrine system. They're very slow into the blood. Think of like puberty. It's a long, slow change. It's mediated by hormones versus these tend to be very, very fast. So if people have too much dopamine, we can give them a medication to reduce dopamine. Not enough serotonin, big culprit in depression, give you a medication to increase serotonin. So neurotransmitters, these little these little particles that float across the synapse after this electrical piece, right, play a really big role in mental illness. And so you'll see those talked about all semester long. We also have some brain circuits, and this is kind of newer research, but especially common in depression. There are clusters of brain structures that work together in sometimes the wrong way, and they can lead to things like depression, right? So maybe certain structures kind of working in a perfect storm where they're not functioning properly can cause different mental illnesses to happen. Genetics, another really big culprit in this model, right? People can inherit a propensity to get a mental illness. If you have a biological parent who has something like depression, for example, you're 27% more likely to get it than someone who doesn't have a biological parent with depression. So you're not doomed to get it, but you might be more vulnerable than the average person. Viral infections during pregnancy are another culprit, but by far neurotransmitters and then kind of growing research on brain circuits are the biggest culprits here within this model. So these are common causes of mental illness within the medical biological model. Yeah. Yes, so tricky, right? But yeah, there is a component to it. So when we get to chapter 10, okay, good. I couldn't remember if I started it or not. When I get to chapter 10, I will talk about addiction or substance use disorder, which is considered a mental illness. Yeah. Other thoughts or comments? Yeah.
So you said that people with depression could have like a 27% chance of passing on, yeah?
Yeah, so it's considered to have a genetic element to it. It's something like 20.
I don't know, the genes are activated during the pregnancy.
Yeah, right. I mean, it depends on a whole host of factors, right? But a lot of disorders do have a genetic element, right? And again, it doesn't mean that you're destined to get it, but you might be more vulnerable than the average person.
People that with how child was a much higher chance.
Potentially, right? So if, let's say we have biological mother and biological father who both have depression, right? And they have a biological child together, right? That child would have a higher risk than if only one of the parents have, for sure.
That's
Yeah, but again, it might only be like in the 50% range, right? Or like 40-something% range, which sounds high, but you still have that other like 50-something% that you wouldn't. So it could go either way. Yeah, sorry.
In that situation, you said there's a lot of factors. Would it be more genetic or more like the environment that we raised in?
Sure, both. It's always both, right? In psychology, it's almost always a combination of factors, right? So there's a perspective, and we won't talk about it for a couple of units, but it's called the diathesis stress perspective. And what it says is that you're born with a biological vulnerability, but whether or not that vulnerability actually comes to be realized depends on the environment. So let's say you're born with a propensity to get depression, but you have great resiliency, you raised in a positive environment, you have all these great coping skills, you might not ever get it, right? Even though you have that biological vulnerability. So the environment plays a huge role, right? And that's the case with a lot of things. Intelligence is a big one, personality like attributes. You're born with some things that are potentially going to happen, whether or not they do depends on the environment. Yeah, exactly, right? Like which ones get watered or don't, right? It's going to depend which things grow and which ones don't, right? So from this perspective, if we think it's one of these things, we have some treatments, right, that are going to be driven by that idea. Medication, and we talked about this a little last time. These medications will pop up a lot. We have medications. If somebody is struggling with their neurotransmitter imbalance, medication, right? And give them an antipsychotic to reduce dopamine, an antidepressant to increase serotonin, right? We give lots and lots of medications. We'll talk about them all semester. That is by far the biggest treatment within this approach, within this model. But there are two other ones that are sometimes explored. The second one are brain stimulation methods. Right? And this would never be the first line of defense. Like you wouldn't go to your doctor with depression and they'd be like, great, electroconvulsive therapy it is. Like that would never happen. But if you weren't responsive to medication or you couldn't tolerate the side effects of medication and your depression was severe enough, we might consider something like a brain stimulation method. And the old standby is something called electroconvulsive therapy or ECT. Shock therapy or electroshock therapy as it was often called. And this is a form of treatment where they pass an electrical current through your brain for a matter of seconds, causing you to have a seizure. And it's thought to activate some of those different brain circuits related to depression and alleviate depression. Got a lot of side effects. It's not like an easy procedure. It can cause a lot of like unwanted things as well, but it's been done for a long, long time. And I won't ask you this, but just an interesting piece of history. The first time that we tried giving a patient a seizure to help them was way back in the 16th century, right? We used to use substances to do this, but in 1934, and again, I won't ask you that, we tried the first electrical current through a patient that had schizophrenia. This patient hadn't spoken in months, had severe, profound schizophrenia. And so they decided to try a brain stimulation method on this guy, right? They passed 55 amps through this guy's brain for 2 seconds. That's a lot. 55 amps. Can you imagine being this guinea pig? I would not want to be this person, right? 55 amps, 2 seconds. The guy had a massive seizure, flailing, right? Massive, absolutely massive seizure. But then he sat up and spoke and swore at them and like, what the F are you trying to do to me? And they considered it a great success because he spoke for the first time in quite a while, right? We've been refining it ever since, right? And this is something that is still used today. It's again, never the first line of defense, but it is something that we still do now. And there are some better and newer forms of brain stimulation methods that we'll talk about in chapter 6, I believe. But electroconvulsive therapy is still kind of the old standby. And I have a clip of what this used to look like. It's a little more refined now, but I think this is kind of the stereotype that people think of. If you've seen the movie One from Hurting Himself, people would often hurt themselves pretty badly during these procedures. Now, it's more of an outpatient procedure where people are given like a muscle relaxant to help them calm down so they don't hurt themselves so much. But it can lead to things like memory loss and confusion. Those are very, very common like side effects of this. But it's usually like a 6 to 12 round treatment that people have as a way of dealing with very severe depression or other disorders that aren't responsive to medication. Okay, so again, never a first line of defense. And even more rare than that is psychosurgery. So there might be some cases where somebody does have an anatomical issue that maybe we can correct, in which case we might explore surgery in this perspective. Is that a yeah, fairly. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say it's shocking that it's effective, but bad pun, right? Or a good pun. I don't know, one or the other. So again, it's like 6 to 12 like treatments generally makes up like a round of this. And so what you tend to see is it works on the brain circuits for depression. So one of the brain circuits involves a very underactive frontal lobe. And so by doing this, you're stimulating the frontal lobe and increasing the activity. There's a newer method called TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, that we'll talk about. And it's actually wildly effective and way less invasive, but it's expensive, which is why it's not as popular yet. But it's going to eventually, I would bet, take over this because this has been around forever, and it is a little bit more like blunt compared to TMS, which is very targeted and there's no current. It's just a coil that sits above the head and stimulates a small little region in the brain that is in charge of serotonin. Yeah. Any other thoughts or comments, questions, anything? The next perspective, the psychodynamic or psychoanalytic, they both are the same. Psychoanalytic literally means like an analysis of the psyche or an analysis of the mind. This is Freud's perspective. And Freud talked a lot about the unconscious mind. You could say early childhood. And then I'm going to add sexual and aggressive urges. Freud, probably the most well-known of all psychologists, right? You know it's him because he's holding a cigar. He's always holding a cigar right there in his hand. It's actually what killed him, right? He died of cancer of the mouth from smoking the cigar his entire life. He had like 30-something surgeries and he just kept on smoking. The most famous psychologist of all time was heavily addicted to cigars and couldn't quit, which is just fascinating to think about, right? But very, very well-known guy. His theories are super controversial. They're very outdated and old, but he was the first one to propose these ideas. And so everybody who came after built on what he put out there. So it's important to mention him, even though his ideas don't have a lot of like modern credibility. Every single person followed in his footsteps, right? So he's often like the father of psychology in a lot of ways, like the person that everybody thinks of when they think of psychology. Yeah.
Paul Young was actually a direct student with him.
Yeah.
And that I'm sure you already know, but I don't know if anybody else in the class knows.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah, and Carl Jung is one of my favorite psychologists, actually. And Freud called him his beloved son, right? He thought of him as the son
Well,
until he disagreed with him, and then they split Yeah, kind of in a very like unhappy way. But yeah, I mean, everybody. So it was Freud, and then Jung came after him, and then Adler, and like a bunch of people, and every single person took those ideas and kind of like shifted them just a little bit to get us where we are today. Yeah, really interesting guy. Jung, even more interesting. We won't talk about him really in here, but he was definitely a very big follower of Freud until he disagreed with the sexuality piece, and then they fought, right? But Freud, well known for this idea of the unconscious mind. Now, the unconscious is stuff that you're not aware of, but stuff that's like kind of buried deep down in your mind. Typically, Freud would say these are things from like childhood. It's not stuff that's recent, it's stuff that's older. And we sometimes use the analogy or like the metaphor of an iceberg when it comes to consciousness. So if I draw you a little iceberg, here's the water line. I can't help it. Okay, here's the Titanic. Gonna have Jack at the front, right? I don't know why I can't help that, but iceberg, right? And we go way below the surface of the water. And the idea here is that what you can see is way smaller than everything else. What you can see, what's above the water, is what's conscious. What you are aware of in any given moment, right now, you are consciously awake. Quick check, everyone's awake, right? You're awake, you're alert, you're paying attention, you are consciously aware of this moment right now. Right below the surface would be what is called the subconscious, or we can even say the pre-conscious mind. I bet you weren't thinking about what you had for breakfast until I mention it, right? And now you might think about what you had for breakfast. Maybe you missed it already, right? But if you think of something that wasn't in the current moment, you can recall it very quickly. That's like your sub or pre-conscious. Way down here would be the unconscious. Stuff that is buried deep down that you don't have easy access to. Now, Freud talked about the unconscious mind being very, very much stuff from childhood, early childhood. And it would come out in things like dreams. Freud called dreams the royal road to the unconscious mind, right? That through dreams, when you're in like an altered state, right, things would surface, right? Things from your unconscious. Paid a lot of attention to it. Another way that you might see the unconscious mind is in Freudian slips, right? If you've ever said the wrong person's name, which can be really detrimental depending on the circumstance, right? Freud would say that that was on your mind. That person was on your mind. You have a dentist appointment and you can't find your keys. It's because you didn't want to go, right? According to Freud, right? And of course you didn't want to go. I never want to go to the dentist, no way. But I had a biology teacher, and it's such a great example, so I can't help but share it. Like he always used to say orgasm instead of organism. Like he'd be like, this orgasm, sorry. And we're like, oh, we know what you're thinking about, right? Freudian slips are little windows to the unconscious mind. When you say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, or, you know, he said there were no accidents. And so according to Freud, everything was meaningful. Yeah.
I of course heard about that as well, but there's a specific word for it he made, right? And I can't remember, but when I read about it, because I read his direct account from him talking about Freudian slips, but
Yeah.
he called them something else that I was.
He just called them slips, right? Slips of the tongue or slips.
Yeah.
And then people call them Freudian slips after him. But yeah, I mean, he had the term for everything,
Yeah.
right? If you think of it, you can let me know. Yeah, feel free. If you look it up and find it, let me know. Right? But Freud thought the unconscious mind was huge and that everything is set in childhood, right? So your relationships with your parents early on are really important. He thought your personality was largely set by the age of like 6. So everything from like 6 and before was really, really meaningful. He talked a lot about sexual instincts, very, very sexual ideas in his theories. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable because he talked about sexuality in early childhood and how it relates to your parents, right? The Oedipal complex and the Electra complex, falling in love with one parent and hating the other. These are all things that Freud is known for. And he talked about that drive being called the libido. Right, our sexual energy is called the libido. It goes to different parts of our body as we age. And again, very, very prominent role of early childhood, especially things like mom, right? Everything goes back to the relationship with the mother, according to Freud. Another thing that he's well known for that relates to our class, he's got a lot of ideas, but directly related to us. He talked about 3 forces that shape our personality. these aren't structures in the brain. These are like kind of forces or ideas in the mind that he talked about. The id, the ego, and the superego. And I love this picture because I think it's so like visually descriptive of these different parts here. But we have the id, the ego, and the superego. Ideally, they should be in balance. If they're not in balance, it causes problems for people. So your id is your very pleasure-driven part of yourself. It's primal, unconscious, uncontrolled, unchecked. Not a single one of you is giving into your id right now, because your id wouldn't be behaving so properly, right? Like my id would be like, forget this, we're going to get like donuts and croissants, and I'm not paying for them. I'm going to eat 50 of them because I want to, right? Just a little window into my id right there. Your id is very primal that way. Let's skip this one for a second. The superego. So you can think of it as like the devil on your shoulder. It's another way of thinking about it. The superego would be like the angel on the shoulder, the conscience. It's the part of you that says what you should do or what you shouldn't do. So my superego, like, no, if you leave right now, you'll get in trouble, right? You want to keep your job, and you shouldn't eat 50 croissants or donuts. That's not good for you. And you definitely shouldn't steal them, because that's even worse, right? It's like that conscience part, like the shoulds are very common here. And the ego is the great reality principle in the middle, the great compromise, right? So my ego could be like, okay, we're done in 45 minutes. I don't have class after this. I could go get a donut or croissant. That would be reasonable, and pay for it, right? So I don't go to jail, right? It's like that compromiser, right? And our ego should be the one that kind of drives the ship. But Freud said if we're too driven by our id, we get ourselves into trouble. Aggressive and sexual instincts and urges that get us into trouble. Too driven by the superego, we might have a lot of guilt, right? And anxiety as we're not meeting the things that we feel like we should be doing. So ideally, these structures work in harmony and in balance. If they're out of proportion, they can cause us some issues. Now, Freudian therapy isn't super common anymore. Right? It was the therapy for a while. It's the therapy that started all therapies. Freud invented therapy for the most part. But we do see elements of this still used today. Now, I have a little clip that I want to show you, and it's super old and cheesy, but I still think it's a good example. The guy in this is like not the brightest. He's a little slow. And you'll learn how to flirt in it. Not well, but you'll learn how to flirt. But I think it's a great example of what this can look like. Yeah.
Like further research in that time?
No, not yet. Right. So he was more free associating. He's just talking, right? And she asks a few little questions. But typically, Freudian therapists or psychoanalytic therapists don't ask a lot of questions, right? They kind of let you talk, right? Let you just say whatever comes to mind. And free association is a hallmark part of this type of therapy, right? That you just literally like put it all out there. Try not to censor things at all. Try not to stop yourself. Just say whatever is on your mind. Also notice that she said, when I saw you yesterday, right? Very common in this perspective to see this type of therapist daily or multiple times a week. Now, that's not something that is typically at all supported by insurance, so it's not practiced very commonly today, but you might see people do free association. The other way this can sometimes show up is you can give a client a word and have them respond with the first word that comes to mind. And you look for themes or places where they get stuck. I have a great example of that. I usually don't show it, but I'll play it for you really quickly. If you've seen the movie Skyfall, right, one of the Bond movies, it has a great little scene of that. The second they say Skyfall, he stops and he gets stuck. You know, Freud would say that that was obviously something that was very loaded, and we would need to go back and talk about it and work through it, which is kind of like the big premise here of talking about working through and like processing whatever came up. But that is one way that this could also be used. Sometimes it's used in like assessment as well. I give you a word, you give me the first one that pops up, and we look for themes or places where you get stuck. Did you have a?
I was gonna say he's I'm a big fan of
Yeah.
Daniel Craig films.
Yeah.
Especially Skyfall. I think it's one of the better ones.
I would agree.
But he stopped because M was there. So if you notice the entire scene he's sitting, his
Mhm.
body's looking right at M through glass.
Yeah.
So
They have an interesting dynamic, don't they?
so he stopped Because they wanted, the agency where to go. So it wants to know where it's coming.
Right,
Set hopes.
right.
It's his childhood.
And there's a
I-
lot of like
honestly-
stuff.
Honestly, it makes more sense. It makes a lot of sense to stop there.
Yeah.
because It is loaded for him. We also wanted to spite out.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love that, right? Great movies. I love the Bond movies, especially his movies. I'm sad that he's no longer Bond, right? But he does have like a whole, it's his childhood home, right? And he has this whole history with that in addition to the other piece. Yeah.
How do things get resolved? Is it just like on a patient figuring out themselves?
No, so it's a great question, right? So it's a lot of going back and talking about stuff. A lot of talking. This is a very talk heavy type of therapy. So he didn't tend to use a lot of techniques, sometimes hypnosis. But what was more common was, all right, well, so let's go back and talk about like whatever happened during childhood. Let's figure out what happened when you were younger that is going to be influencing what's happening now. And we're going to go back and talk through it a million times probably, and just kind of what's called working through, like we're going to face whatever conflict happened and then maybe reinterpret it, maybe even role play it out in a different way. And that will help to overcome problems in the current moment. So it's very, very slow because you're often trying to access things that are buried in the unconscious and then talk and work through them.
Kind of be like exposure therapy.
A little bit. Exposure therapy is a little more behavioral, where we're going to have you face like head on whatever it is that's bothering you. We'll talk about exposure therapy actually in a little bit. It's more like, let's say you're having problems in your relationships now. Okay, right? Like where you don't have a lot of trust, you feel like people are going to leave you. According to Freud, he would say that maybe something happened when you were younger where like one of your parents left in some way, even if it was like a smaller absence. And so it would be going back, trying to find when that happened, talking about the feelings that were part of it, maybe even like, it's really just mainly just talking it through until you change your perspective. Not the most common way of going about it. Not the most effective either. It's very, very, very slow. Okay. Yeah.
In therapy in general, if you start talking about something, you can think of worse than.
Sure.
Speak about it.
Yeah.
It's like shit, it's weighing down more.
Yeah. And it's really common with almost anything in life, right? Like the second you bring something up, it might get worse before it gets better. Very common when people are dealing with traumas, dealing with anxiety, stress, childhood stuff, that the second you dig it up, you're going to suffer more, right? But you have to dig it up in order to work through it. So it's that double-edged sword, right? Like you bring up the things that happen that are causing problems, and it might be worse for a time until hopefully you work through it and then it's better. Yeah, sadly, right? Worse before it gets better. That's really common. Throwing things. Speaking of which, the other big thing up here, transference. This is such an interesting one, and I have to tell you, I didn't believe in transference until I became a therapist, and it's so real, right? Transference was something that was big for Freud because he saw his clients like every day, right, or multiple times a week. And so if you see a therapist multiple times a week for years, you're going to develop quite a relationship with them. Even if you see them once a week for years. Like I've seen my therapist now for 2.5 years, once a week, right? Like I have a good relationship with this person. Like she knows me pretty well. I know her pretty well. You get what's called transference. At times you start to redirect feelings at people in your life onto the therapist. And sometimes they can have what's called counter transference, where they direct feelings about someone in their life onto you as the client. Now, when I was a therapist, people would randomly just get so pissed off at me for no reason. Like they come into therapy and they'd be mad at me. I didn't do anything. I hadn't seen them in a week or two or whatever, but they'd be mad at me because they were mad at somebody else in their life. And it was safe to take it out on me and not that other person, right? So they're redirecting the feelings that they had about someone else onto me. I had a client who randomly decided that he was in love with me. Right. And I didn't know how to tell him in every possible way he was barking up the wrong tree. But he randomly started bringing me gifts, calling me all the time, like trying to flirt with me. And I was like, dude, I don't know what you're doing right now. But it was so awkward. Right. And I'll take mad over that any day. Like I'd rather someone be mad at me as a therapist than like in love with me. Way more often. But it turned out he was in love with his best friend's girlfriend, somebody who was completely unavailable and inaccessible to him. And I was completely unavailable and inaccessible to him, and he put it on to me because I was a safer target. Once we figured that out, it went away, thank God, right? It was so nice when it went away. But this happens a lot. Like my therapist every now and then will tell me about her countertransference. And I appreciate like her honesty because it makes me want to be honest. Like she'll say stuff like, you know, I feel like I want to swoop in and rescue you like you were like a child. Because she has kids, right? Like we're all people. And so oftentimes as people, we will redirect feelings we have toward a therapist. Freud believed these to be incredibly meaningful. And he would spend a lot of time analyzing them and trying to figure out where they were coming from so that you could work through them. And oftentimes this can be a really helpful element. If you have a good relationship with your therapist and you can talk about the transference, it can be incredibly helpful for your therapeutic process. So again, not the most common, but little techniques of this are often used in modern therapy. Any other thoughts, comments, anything? Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that we like the major contributors to the like marketing of cigarettes. Like so he knows like that it's a ploy and like all these things that can be literally behind like the marketing and then
Yeah, he was heavily addicted to cigars. He had oral cancer, cancer of the jaw and the mouth. Like I said, I think he had like 30 something surgeries, and he just kept on smoking them. Right? He had a lot of issues himself. Like a lot of the therapists, it's super interesting. It's out of the scope of this class, but every single therapist, you can see their life experiences and backgrounds put into their theories. Like Adler, another famous therapist, was super sick as a child all the time, right? And so he talked a lot about feeling inferior and developing an inferiority complex. Freud had a lot of like sexual repression issues. His theories are all about sexual repression and libido, right? Like, and so they play out their ideas and their theories. Really just kind of a fascinating side note. Like it's something that you see over and over and over again, that people had issues. And so those are their theories, right? And they, you know, and they really put them into it. It's interesting. All right, next model, the behavioral model. This is all about conditioning and learning. Your life experiences, right? And we can be conditioned and learn to develop good habits, bad habits, and everything in between, right? What we've been rewarded or punished for, what we've been conditioned to do. All of those things can heavily influence our behaviors. And so from this perspective, it's like stimulus response, right? And we look at rewards and punishers and conditioning. And how have we maybe developed maladaptive or like negative patterns of behavior from the things we've been rewarded for? And very, very, very common to look at in this perspective. And there are two different types of conditioning. And hopefully, again, this is a little bit of a review from intro psych, but there's classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Classical conditioning was the one made famous by Ivan Pavlov, right? His research that he did with dogs. I have a little clip of his original research, just as a quick review if you're thinking like conditioning seems like a long time ago from when you learned it, or maybe you didn't learn it. So just as a quick review, let me play this for you. It's like a little video I play in my intro psych class, showing you this experiment that he did with dogs, which he became famous for. It led to the development of classical conditioning. So it's brief, but I salivate to food. If you present a dog or even a person, right, with food, they're going to salivate. Right? It's a very common unlearned reaction to have. So what he did in his experiment, as you just saw, rang the bell, presented food, rang a bell, presented food, rang a bell, presented food over and over and over again. Pretty soon the dogs salivated to the bell because they knew that it meant that food was coming. Right? It's a very automatic, involuntary type of learning where like you learn to associate two things together. So he had terms like unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, conditioned stimulus, conditioned response. It's all about learning associations, learning to associate the bell with the food, right? Very, very common. And then we can also add down here that it's very involuntary or passive in nature. Sometimes you don't even realize this is happening to you, or you might not be aware of it. What happens with this is people learn to associate two things. And again, it's not always on purpose. How many of you have a food that whenever you smell it or see it, it makes you feel sick? Does anyone have that? Like a food in your life, right? Mine is chili. Some of you who've taken like intro psych with me, my mother-in-law has food poisoned to me more times than I can count on two hands, right? And like years and years and years ago, she made me violently ill off of chili. Everybody in the family violently ill off of chili. I didn't know better. I had just met my partner. It tasted good. I had no idea that I was on the road to like violent food poisoning. But my mother-in-law, whenever she cooks, right, like I'm scared because I'm gonna get sick. Like, wish me luck. She's coming over for dinner tonight. Like, if you don't see me next week, I die. She killed me. Food poisoning. She's like, I'm gonna make pecan fish. I'm like, please don't. I'm gonna die. Right? Like, I always try to eat a heavy lunch before she comes over. But my mother-in-law, has food poisoned me so many times. The second I smell chili, I like my mouth waters and I feel sick. Right? That's a food aversion, which is typically learned through classical conditioning. It made me sick once. And so now when I smell it, I feel sick, or I expect to get sick. Very common that people develop fears and phobias through classical conditioning. I have a colleague here who got in a violent car accident, like almost took her life years and years and years ago. And when the accident happened, Eye of the Tiger was playing on the radio. And so anytime she hears the song Eye of the Tiger, her palms start sweating and she gets scared and expects something bad to happen. That's classical conditioning. She didn't do it on purpose. It just happened to her. This tends to be a very like passive type of learning. If you've seen that clip from The Office where he conditions him with the Altoid, right? He has no idea what's happening. He's like, what's going on right now? Why is my mouth so like dry? Why do I want an Altoid? Right? Like this is something that you're not always aware of, but it can lead to powerful associations with preferences and fears and anxieties and so on. So that's one way that people could learn, to have like a phobia or a fear or something going on in your life. The other one is operant conditioning. And this one's a little more like common sense, right? Operant conditioning was made famous by B.F. Skinner. And he used words and terms that, like up here, reinforcer and punisher, punishments, right? This one is all about consequences. If I do this, what happens next, right? What are the consequences for my actions? And this is much more voluntary or active in nature. People choose a behavior based on what happens next. If you study for an exam and you do well, probably going to study for the next exam because it paid off for you, right? If I clean the house for my partner and I'm like thanked and told I'm the best person in the world, right? Best partner in the world, I'll do it again. But clean the house and no one notices? Oh, hell no, I'm not going to do it again, right? Like, I mean, we're as people, like we respond to consequences, right? Very, very common, easy example of this. Let's say that you're really sick. And when you're sick, everybody feels bad for you. They take care of you, they bring you stuff, and they care for you. That attention is rewarding, it's reinforcing. So what if it starts to become a pattern where you fake illness in order to get attention and sympathy? You could learn kind of a negative or maladaptive way of behaving because you've been rewarded for it, right? You act out and bully other people and it makes you feel like strong and powerful. So you're going to keep doing it. Right? So what are we rewarded or punished for? And how does that shape our behavior? Rewards and punishments are consequences, right? And very common in this perspective to look at, how can we change a behavior that maybe somebody has learned to do? So this perspective doesn't care at all. This behavioral perspective doesn't care at all about your thinking patterns or your unconscious mind or your early childhood. It's all about what is the behavior and how can we recondition it and change it in some way. And so from this perspective, we identify the behavior and we try and replace it with a better one, right? We try and do behavioral techniques to replace it with something else. And there's a couple of different ones that we can use, and we'll talk about some of these again later. Token economies are really, really common, especially with kids. And I would imagine every single one of you had a token economy in school or at some point as a child. right? Or maybe even recently, right? You never know. My kids, they come home from school every day and they'll be like, I got 2 gold tickets today, right? I'm like, ooh, gold tickets, what's that? And they're like, well, if I get 8 gold tickets, I get a prize. Those gold tickets are tokens, right? You get a certain number of tickets and you can exchange it for a prize. Certain number of stickers on a chart and you can exchange it for something. Points, right? My kids, we used to do, there was like a great app I had on my phone. When they didn't fight for the day, they would get a sticker. And if they didn't fight for a certain number of days, right, they would get a prize. They could trade it in for something, right? That doesn't work so much anymore, right? They fight too often. They never got stickers at the end. It failed. But it's a very common approach, right? We can teach better behaviors and reward behaviors we like by giving you stickers or points or tokens for behaviors that we want. These other 2 are exposure therapies, like you were mentioning earlier. Very common to use behavioral therapies for phobias and fears and anxieties. When people have a fear of something, we can treat that through reconditioning their fear, right? We'll talk about phobias in a couple of weeks. A lot of people have phobias. I am absolutely terrified of spiders. There was like a gigantic tarantula-sized spider down by my office this morning. And I'm not kidding you. If it had been in front of my door, I might have left. Like, you wouldn't have seen me today. But it was like 3 doors down and I like didn't want to walk anywhere near it. I'm not sure if it was real, alive, or dead. Like I went nowhere near it. Just talking about it, my palms are sweaty, right? Like I hate spiders, like even daddy long legs, which are completely not dangerous at all. They make me nervous, right? And so from this perspective, we could treat that fear through reconditioning it. And every now and then I think it'd be worth doing, but you could do flooding, or you could do systematic desensitization. And we'll talk about both more later, but flooding is a massive exposure to whatever it is you're afraid of. Massive exposure. So for me, being afraid of spiders, this might be letting like several spiders or like a bunch of spiders crawl all over me, like Fear Factor style. And I think I would die. Just thinking about it, like I think that'd be the end of me. I'd have a heart attack. Flooding's not for everybody. People do sometimes have heart attacks. So flooding is like a massive dose where you face your fear head on, typically in a very large level of exposure. And we'll see some examples of that with a guy who has a fear of heights later in the semester. Systematic desensitization is much more slow and gradual, right? If you're afraid of spiders, let's make a hierarchy of fear. Okay, and then I'm going to show you a picture of a spider, and you're going to rate that on a scale of 0 to 100. And then we're going to calm down and deep breathe and get you calm. And then we'll look at the picture again until we systematically desensitize you to that fear. Much slower, but it tends to be very successful for people who go through it. This one's really fast and it can be successful, but a lot less people choose to do it because it is so intense. So these are very common techniques that we use to treat phobias, fears, anxieties, trying to recondition or change the behavior that is a problem. Thoughts, comments, questions, anything? I'm so like, I don't know if that spider's still there when we go down. We have to look for it. It was literally, I'm not joking. It was like that big. Like, I'm going to dream about that thing tonight. Awful, right? Gross spider. Anything for here? What was that? Oh, no, see, and I'm looking for it everywhere. It's downstairs and I'm like, I know it's in here somewhere, right? And that's the thing with phobias. They're so irrational. We'll talk about those more later. I definitely have a phobia of spiders. My kids know better than to ask them to kill spiders, right? Not a chance. The next model is the cognitive model. And this one is all about thinking patterns. We could add expectations. Has a lot to do with the way that you think about the world, right? That your thinking patterns can cause you problems and lead to false assumptions. So we look a lot at like the illogical thinking or like negative thinking patterns that people might have, right? If you are spending your entire time in this class terrified that we might have an earthquake, right? You spend the whole time in here like, what if we have an earthquake? What if an earthquake happens? I'm just waiting for that earthquake to happen. What am I going to do if the earthquake happens? Like, you're just focusing on that the whole time, right? Then you're not present and you're probably having a lot of anxiety, right? The idea from this perspective, from a cognitive therapy perspective, is let's look at how likely is that to happen. What would you do if that did happen? Let's play it out and talk it out. It's looking at those illogical thinking patterns that are maybe causing you issues. Very common with depression. And again, this is a cognitive therapy approach. There's people like Aaron Beck, we'll talk about him more in the depression unit, but very common in this perspective to try and look at thinking patterns and change them. Now, you can combine cognitive and behavioral models together. And this is a very commonly used and utilized approach, especially now. CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, is probably one of the more contemporary models of therapy. So CBT, or cognitive behavioral model, if we go with model instead of therapy, combines the cognitive and behavioral perspectives together. A lot of therapists use this approach. I'm sure you've heard of CBT or heard those words together. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. This focuses on not only the behaviors, but also the thoughts behind it. And so you're combining them together, which makes it even more effective. We might do some things where we look at the thinking patterns and some things where we focus on conditioning, right? You're combining them, and it tends to be a very strong, effective, and very sound approach to therapy. And a huge part of this cognitive behavioral model, how many of you have heard of the term mindfulness? Mindfulness training or mindfulness? A lot of you, this has been around a long, long time, but it is so popular right now. The idea of being mindful, right? And I will tell you, I'll be honest with you, when I first heard the term mindfulness or somebody told me to be mindful, I rolled my eyes. Like, I was like, mindful? Really? Like, be mindful, practice mindfulness. Right? Mindfulness means being in the present moment, intentionally and non-judgmentally. So instead of sitting here thinking about the past or thinking about the future, you try and focus on the moment right now. You're intentionally present in the moment right now, which minimizes the amount of other things going on and helps you to be more like grounded and have less anxiety. It's not the easiest thing to do. It takes a lot of practice and training. And I've grown to appreciate mindfulness. I've again used to have kind of a really negative attitude about it. But mindfulness and mindfulness training is a big part of cognitive behavioral approaches. Looking at your thinking and your behaviors, focusing on being present. We'll talk about this a little more when we get to the unit on stress, but it's a very big focus of that branch of psychology. Yeah.
If you like just starts.
Yeah.
What is that?
It is true, actually. If you fake happiness, it's like the whole fake it till you make it kind of idea. If you pretend to be happy, it actually causes you to become happy. And there'll be a random point where you'll cross over and be like, well, when did I stop faking? And you might not know, right? So if you are really upset and having a hard time, if you pretend to be happy, it does tend to lead to happiness. Some of that is biological, right? And some of that might be a little bit like more cognitive, right? Like you're trying to change the way you're thinking. There's kind of a hybrid of them. You could look at it a lot of different ways, but there is some truth to that, right? If you pretend to be happy, it does tend to lead to happiness. It's like your brain doesn't know the difference at some point. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? I have I've kind of a cool training that the counseling center here and I worked on together that I'll probably share with you when we get to the stress disorders unit. It's related to mindfulness. We have a lot of cool little like 5-minute mindfulness activities, which I think are kind of fun to try out. We'll talk about that chapter 5, I think it is. All right, last one, I'm just going to mention this and then I'm going to stop here because I have a couple of different videos with this and I don't want to start it and then have to stop them halfway through. But this next perspective is going to look a lot at kind of very lofty ideas, right? The humanistic existentialist model. Let me just put some terms up for that here. And we'll go right in. And then we'll talk about the actual types of therapy here next time. So humanistic existential, I'm going to abbreviate it. From this model, we're looking at a couple of things. Humanism and existentialism are separate models, but they blend together very nicely. So we're looking at things like self-awareness, your potential, like realizing your potential as a person. We could also add meaning. Existentialism is focused on finding meaning. What is it that's meaningful to you? What is it that gives you meaning in your life? right? And where are you getting that or driving that from? Humanism looks a lot at like the goals that you might have, right? Like maybe forming a relationship is something that's important to you and how you view your ideal self. So it's you're going to be pushed toward trying to form relationships because that would help you to fulfill your potential. Also having a lot of awareness of yourself, being responsible for your own behavior. We could also add spirituality tends to be inherent. A lot of perspectives ignore spiritual focuses, but this one kind of tends to embrace it a little more. Has a lot of concepts here that are not the easiest to define and measure. It's a very positive branch of psychology versus Freud's tend to be very pessimistic. But we'll talk about these next time. There's 3 different types of therapy here that are very common. And I have a really cool video. It's so old, but it's just like a classic in the field. And what you can see in this video is there's this woman named Gloria who works with 2 different therapists. So she works with Carl Rogers and then Fritz Perls. And they spend a couple of minutes talking about what they're going to do, how they're going to approach their session. And then you get to see a few minutes of them actually doing therapy with these individuals. And you'll see how polar opposite these are. They're so different. We can talk about that next time. So what I'll do is I'll stop here for today. And the next class, we'll keep going with chapter 2. We'll work our way through the rest of it. I do want to take attendance one last time. So I'll give you a second if you want to pack up, and then I'll do that, and then we will call it a day.